All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling dishonesty, the really fascinating stuff. We've got Dan Ariely's The Honest Truth About Dishonesty and some pretty crazy stories. We're going to figure out like why we cheat, how much we cheat, and all the weird things that mess with our moral compass.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting is that early he goes right after that classic economic theory, the SMO that simple model of rational crime. It basically says we decide to be dishonest by weighing the costs and benefits.
So like if the reward's big and we probably won't get caught, we cheat. That seems a little basic, don't you think?
Exactly, like we're just robots or something. But Early's research shows it's way more complex than that. For instance, he did this experiment where people could cheat on a math test to win money.
Oh, interesting.
But here's the thing, even when they could win a ton of money, people didn't go crazy with the cheating. They just fudged their scores a little no matter how much cash was on the line.
That's so weird. I feel like if I thought I could get away with it, especially for a big reward, I might be tempted to really go for it. Why didn't they cheat more?
That's where the fudge factor comes in, this idea from Airly. It's like we all have this internal limit on how much we can cheat before we start feeling bad about ourselves. We want to get ahead, sure, but we also want to think we're good people.
So it's like finding that balance between getting what you want and not totally trashing your morals. Kind of like when we tell ourselves those little white lies to justify everyday cheating. Like inflating your expenses or borrowing office supplies.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're always rationalizing those little cheats. And get this, our fudge factor seems to get bigger when we're dealing with things that aren't directly money.
You mean like that experiment where they left Coke and dollar bills in a dorm fridge?
Exactly. Students grabbed the sodas, but nobody took the cash. It's like there's this mental block about stealing money, but taking soda, well, that's not so bad.
I wonder if it's because we don't think of those everyday things as valuable as actual money. Or maybe it feels less personal to snag a soda than to take cash.
That's a really good question. And it makes you think, right? Especially now with everything becoming cashless. Does using credit cards and stuff make us less worried about being honest?
Yeah. Is it?
Airly tells the story about a consultant, right? This guy noticed everyone at his firm was overbilling like crazy. And he realized that when it's just numbers on a screen, it feels less dishonest somehow.
Whoa, that's messed up. So is that detachment from actual money-making financial dishonesty worse?
It's something to think about for sure, especially as we move more and more towards digital money. But here's something else. While our environment does affect our behavior, Airly found that even small moral reminders can make a big difference in keeping us honest.
Like those signs that say shoplifters will be prosecuted. Do those actually work?
Well, not really. It's not about threats. Airely's research says it's more about triggering that inner voice, that sense of right and wrong. For example, he found that just asking students to think about the Ten Commandments before a test completely stopped cheating.
Really? Even if they weren't religious?
Yep. It's like thinking about moral codes, even if we don't always follow them, activates our honesty, so to speak.
So it's a little mental nudge, like checking yourself before you wreck yourself. But is it realistic to think people are going to start reciting the Ten Commandments every time they make a decision?
Not really, but Airely found that even signing a simple honor code made a big difference in student cheating. It didn't even matter if their school had an honor code or not. Just signing it was enough to make them act more honestly.
Wow, it's kind of wild how those little things can be so effective, like making a mini agreement with yourself. And this even worked in high-pressure situations like Princeton, where you could get kicked out for breaking the honor code.
Yeah, although it didn't seem to last. After a while, those Princeton students were just as likely to cheat as those from schools without an honor code.
That's a bummer. But it's still pretty amazing that signing a pledge could have such a big impact, even if it's temporary. Makes you wonder what other subtle things we could use to nudge people towards being more honest.
Exactly. It suggests that instead of always focusing on punishment, maybe we could create environments that naturally encourage ethical behavior. And one of the biggest things to consider in making those environments is conflicts of interest.
So you're talking about those situations where someone's personal interests, like, get in the way of them being fair. Like, imagine a financial advisor recommending an investment that makes them money, even if it's not the best for their client.
It's sneakier and more common than we realize. Airly tells this story about his own dentist, a totally nice guy. But then the dentist got this new CAD/CAM machine, and suddenly he was finding all these reasons to give people crowns, even if they didn't really need them.
It's scary to think that even someone you trust could be influenced by money without even realizing it. How often does that kind of thing happen, I wonder?
That's the thing about conflicts of interest. They can work on us without us knowing it, shaping how we see things and what we decide to do. And it happens in every profession, not just dentistry.
What about all those pharmaceutical reps? The ones who are always taking doctors out to fancy dinners and stuff. Isn't that a conflict of interest?
Absolutely. They're constantly giving doctors gifts, trips, even offering to take them to dance classes, all to get them to prescribe their drugs.
It's messed up how much effort goes into manipulating doctors like that.
Yeah.
Makes you realize how easily we can be swayed without even knowing it. Even Airily, he struggled with bias when he was an expert witness in a legal case.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even the smartest people can have blind spots when it comes to their own biases. Airely even tells this story about almost throwing out research data that didn't fit his theory. He thought he was doing it for science, but really, his ego was getting in the way.
All right, we've all got those blind spots. But what about that idea that being totally transparent about potential conflicts, full disclosure, can fix this problem? Wouldn't that help people make better choices?
That's the thinking behind a lot of sunshine policies, but research shows it's not so simple. There was this study where financial advisors had to tell their clients about any conflicts of interest, and guess what? It actually made their advice even more biased.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I would think knowing about the advisor's bias would make people more cautious about their recommendations.
Turns out, disclosing the conflict actually made the advisors feel like they had a free pass to be even more biased. It's like they thought, well, I told them about it, so now I can do what I want.
So sometimes telling people about the bias can actually backfire and make things worse for the client. That's terrifying. So if we can't always avoid these conflicts and telling people about them doesn't always work, what are we supposed to do? How do we navigate a world full of these hidden traps?
That's a fantastic question. And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some practical strategies for dealing with these challenges and see how we can apply what we've learned from Airily to make better choices.
So we're back, still digging into the honest truth about dishonesty. And last time, we were talking about conflicts of interest. But it's funny, I never thought a sport like golf could teach us so much about ethics.
Right. You'd think with all that self-policing and honor stuff, golf would be like the poster child for good behavior.
Yeah, totally.
But Airily, he found this surprisingly common trend of, well, let's just say creative rule bending on the golf course.
Oh, come on. Are golfers really out there fudging their scores all the time?
Well, he asked tons of golfers about these made-up cheating scenarios, situations where they could totally get away with breaking the rules.
Sneaky.
And the results were pretty interesting. Those scores are way more flexible than you might think.
So like conveniently forgetting a stroke or two. Or maybe, I don't know, giving their ball a little nudge when nobody's watching.
Yeah. Exactly. And what's even weirder is that the way they cheated seemed to matter. Moving the ball with a club was more common than kicking it with their shoe.
Interesting.
And picking it up and putting it somewhere else, well, that felt the most dishonest.
Yeah, I can see that. It goes back to that psychological distance thing, right? The less directly involved we are in the cheating, the easier it is to justify.
Exactly. And this whole thing plays out with mulligans, too, those do-over shots that are technically against the rules. Golfers were way more likely to take an illegal mulligan on the first hole than on the ninth.
I guess on that first hole, you can kind of pretend the game hasn't really started yet. But by the ninth, you're facing reality.
And then there's scorekeeping. Airily found that golfers were more okay with just writing down a better score than they got, rather than adding their scores wrong to get the same result.
It's like we're trying to trick ourselves as much as anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains are amazing at rationalizing. It's kind of funny, but also, these are golfers. They're supposed to be all about integrity.
Right. That's the image, isn't it? But when Airily asked golfers how honest they were, they all rated themselves as way more honest than the average golfer.
Oh, no way. So they're not just cheating, they're lying to themselves about it, too.
Pretty much. It makes you wonder if anyone's really immune to this fudge factor. But the point of Airely's work isn't to make anyone feel bad.
Right. Of course not.
It's about understanding why we do the things we do and finding ways to help people make better choices.
Exactly. It's not about calling people out, it's about learning. So, speaking of influence, how much does our social environment affect how honest we are? Like, is dishonesty contagious?
That's a great question. And Airely's research shows that when we see other people being dishonest, especially people we identify with, it definitely makes us more likely to cheat ourselves.
So if my coworkers are padding their expense reports or taking those super long lunches, I might think it's okay for me to do it too.
It kind of creates this new normal, like everyone's doing it, and that makes it easier to ignore our own conscience.
Wow, dishonesty is like a virus. But is the opposite true? Can honesty be contagious too?
Definitely. It really tells this story about a shared bathroom in a college dorm where people kept stealing the toilet paper.
Oh, no, the worst.
Right, but then someone put up a note just asking people to be cool and share.
And that worked. People actually stopped hoarding the toilet paper.
They did. Just that little reminder about thinking of others was enough to change their behavior.
It's amazing how a small thing can have such a big impact. Maybe that's the key to making a more honest world, focusing on those positive influences that inspire people to do the right thing.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it, that we all have a part to play in setting the ethical standards for our community.
Like a domino effect of goodness. One person's honesty can make others want to be honest too. But what about who we are deep down? Are some people just naturally more honest than others? Like, is there a dishonesty gene out there?
You know, Airlie didn't really go into the whole nature versus nurture debate in this book, but his research definitely suggests that dishonesty isn't just about your personality or your genes. The situations we're in have a huge impact on how we act.
So even a really honest person might be tempted to cheat if the stakes are high enough, or if they think they can get away with it.
Exactly. It really highlights how important it is to create environments that support ethical decision-making. It's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about making honesty the easy choice.
So instead of punishing people after they've done something wrong, we should focus on preventing them from doing it in the first place. Kind of like crime prevention, instead of just locking people up.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Remember that story about the insurance company and the mileage forms? Just by moving the signature line to the top of the page, Airlie was able to drastically reduce dishonest reporting.
Wow, it's crazy how these tiny changes can make such a big difference. It makes you wonder what other clever solutions are out there. What can we do in our own lives to be more honest, both personally and professionally?
That's a great question, and it's the perfect segue into the last part of our deep dive. We'll be exploring some practical tips from Airlie's work and talking about how we can use these insights to create a more honest and trustworthy world.
All right, welcome back for the last part of our deep dive into the honest truth about dishonesty. We've talked about so much, like how we justify cheating and how honesty can be contagious. But now I want to get to the good stuff. How can we actually use this stuff to be more honest ourselves and deal with a world where, let's face it, dishonesty is everywhere?
You're right, it's not enough to just know about it. We've got to be able to actually use this knowledge, maybe even help create a more honest world. Airlie doesn't give us a magic answer, but he does give some really useful advice. And it all starts with looking at ourselves.
So first, we got to admit that we're all capable of being dishonest, even if it's just those tiny little cheats we tell ourselves are okay.
Yeah, exactly. We need to see our own weaknesses, those situations where our fudge factor might take over. Once we know our weak spots, we can start to figure out how to fight them.
That makes sense. So if you know you tend to exaggerate on expense reports, maybe you could come up with a better system for tracking your spending. Or if you're always borrowing office supplies, you could just buy your own.
Perfect examples. It's all about making a real effort to resist those temptations. Airlie also found that it really helps to decide ahead of time that you're going to be honest. It's like making a promise to yourself to stick to a certain standard.
Kind of like those honor codes we talked about. Do you think something that simple can really make a difference in everyday life?
It might seem too easy, but yeah, those pledges can actually be really powerful. Think about it. We sign contracts all the time to make agreements official. Why not do the same thing with our own moral code? You could even write down your own personal honesty code and put it somewhere you'll see it every day.
I like that. Like a contract with your conscience. But what about all those things outside of us that can influence our honesty? We talked about conflicts of interest and how tricky they can be. How do we protect ourselves from those, especially when they come from people we trust?
That's the tough part. Conflicts of interest are everywhere, and they're not always easy to see. Airlie says we should always try to minimize them in our personal lives and at work. So when you're choosing a financial advisor or a doctor or anyone like that, do your research. Look for someone who's open and honest, someone whose goals are the same as yours.
So don't be afraid to ask hard questions and keep looking until you find someone you really trust.
Exactly. And remember, Just because someone's open about their potential biases, it doesn't mean they're going to act ethically. Like we saw before, sometimes being transparent can actually make things worse because people feel like they've already been honest, so now they can do whatever they want.
That's a scary thought. So what else can we do? If we can't always avoid conflicts of interest and disclosure isn't a sure thing, how do we make sure we're not being tricked?
One thing you can do is get a second opinion from someone who's completely unbiased. Especially if you're making a big decision, like something financial, it's always a good idea to talk to someone who has nothing to gain or lose from your choice.
That's smart, like a reality check from someone who's not influenced by the same stuff. But besides protecting ourselves, how can we help create a more honest world in general? Is it all on individuals to be careful? Or can we actually build systems that encourage honesty on a larger scale?
That's a really important question. Airlie thinks we should focus more on preventing dishonesty than punishing it. Instead of trying to catch people after they've cheated, we should try to make honesty the easier choice from the start.
Like that example with the insurance company and the mileage forms. Just moving where people signed made a huge difference in how honest they were.
Yeah.
What are some other examples of those kinds of design changes?
Think about how we reward people at work. If we only care about them hitting certain numbers no matter how they do it, we're basically encouraging them to cut corners and be dishonest. But if we really value ethical behavior and make it part of how we judge their performance, then we can create a culture where honesty is important.
So it's about rewarding the behavior we want to see instead of just punishing the bad stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also makes me think about how important transparency and accountability are, not just for individuals, but for companies and organizations too. You're totally right. Transparency is a powerful tool for making sure people and institutions are responsible for what they do. When information is easy to find, it's harder to get away with being dishonest. And when people know they're being watched, they're less likely to cheat in the first place.
It's like that saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Ah.
But making the world more transparent takes everyone working together. We have to demand honesty from our leaders, support businesses that do things the right way, and make sure we're holding ourselves to the same standards.
Couldn't agree more. It's about making honesty the normal way to do things, not the exception. It's realizing that our choices affect other people, and that by being honest ourselves, we can help build a more ethical world for everyone.
That's a great note to end on. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the honest truth about dishonesty, I hope you're leaving with a better understanding of what makes us tick, how to make better choices, and a commitment to choosing honesty for yourself and for the world.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, building a more honest world starts with each one of us.
And until next time, keep searching for the truth, keep asking those tough questions, and keep choosing honesty.